Hello, my brothers from another mother and sisters from another mister. Back again with another video that is sure to bring back memories and nostalgia from the early 80s. Today I have a lens that is a bit precious to me, and it's not because it's the best lens ever, but it is because it is the first lens I ever bought that wasn't already permanently affixed to a camera. It is this lens right here, the Tokina AT-X 80 to 200 millimeter f2.8. You see, I was never really into photography, production, or anything of that nature. I was, however, the child that liked to take things apart and never put them back together. Well, that is until I got a bit older in my teenage years and whatnot, and I actually managed to fix a few things along the way and learned how to solder. I mean, I did go to school and learn some stuff at the local high school. Because of my experience in the adventure I embarked on in 2012 with a couple other acquaintances, we decided that we were going to do news style reporting and interviews in our area. And I became the one who was responsible for the camera work, of course. Now, I, however, was donated old Canon FD prime lenses as well to go along with that so that I could learn the trade a little bit more. And I did buy a GH3 because it was what everyone was raving about at the time. And the smaller Panasonic that I originally had wasn't really cutting it anymore or doing it what I had to do, the FC150. It was sufficient at news gathering, but it really wasn't suitable for video production. This led me down a rabbit hole of many different types of things to set up a rig and buying whatever people tell you to on YouTube. And I was that guy, and I got sucked in with all the unnecessary tools and accessories. I'm glad I'm out of that phase, however, as it was a giant learning experience. The one gem that came out of this phase was the Tokina AT-X 80 to 200 millimeter f2.8 lens, not to be confused with the later revisions of this that had autofocus. 10 years ago, I did get the kit and the other lenses, and I ended up selling those original lenses for this one. This thing is a beast, and back in the early 1980s, it was supposed to compete with similar Canon lenses at about 1/4 of the cost. I managed to find an ad that lists the lens being sold for $204.95 back in 1985 in the Popular Photography magazine. When adjusted for inflation, that would result in roughly $505 today, which is not very much and very affordable even back then. So it was something definitely to look at. Granted, the Tokina doesn't have all the same features because this lens is certainly not for the faint of heart. It is an all-manual lens, heavy as heck at 1350 grams, a pain in the butt to get on and off the mount. But if you overlook these drawbacks, this monster lens is simply incredible for the time frame. Kabushiki-gashi Tokina, or Tokina, which literally means share company, couldn't have been a more generic term for a company and a lens. The company was founded in 1950 by former Nikon engineers as an OEM manufacturer and originally made lenses for another company such as Vivitar. It also made lenses for Soligar and some others. Early lenses were marked with Tokina Bokeh instead of the familiar name that we have come to know today. The AT-X line was the sixth family of lenses to come from the company starting in 1981, which eventually became a family of 13 and then 17 lenses, including the autofocus variant. Some of the key specs of the lens are the aperture range of f2.8 to f32, one element, and a minimum focus distance of 1.8 meters. It can also use 77 millimeter filters on the front and comes with a lens cap and hood. I unfortunately didn't get a hood with mine. Having a hood on this is actually extremely important because if you're using this thing outside on a sunny day, the glare from the sun will definitely shine onto the lens and your image will look washed out. Not being able to find a proper hood for this thing, I somehow figured out in my whack a hack together mentality that a PVC pipe fits rather snugly on the lens, and that is what I use today. I know it looks a little gnarly. Perhaps not the best idea if you're shooting professional photography, but hey, if it works, why knock it? I had originally ordered this lens from an eBay seller in Japan. It did take about 3 weeks or so to arrive, and I was getting a little worried at first, as sometimes international sellers can be a bit sketchy. But it did eventually arrive, and it came in perfect condition and very smooth. It came with the included carrying case and the red texture inside. The seller even affixed a nice little written card thanking me for the purchase from his eBay store. The real problem wasn't the lens, but how to affix this thing to my modern GH3 at the time with a micro 4/3 mount. Well, that's where Metabones came in. The strange thing is that back in 2012, putting old lenses on new cameras was a bit of a fad, and everyone was raving about it having a super fast lens, as it was the most important thing in photography at the time, and maybe even still is. If you weren't at F2.8 or lower, you just sucked, and you might as well just be put in photography jail at that point. I admit I fell into that trap like a wild boar running full tilt. Didn't help that the Metabones speed booster was being sold for in the range of $500 to $600 Canadian at the time. I suppose somewhere in the back of my mind I justified the cost because I could get any FD lens and mount it onto my camera, so I wouldn't really be losing out in the end. Don't get me wrong, I did use the adapter and the various lenses, but not as much as I assumed. And I even purchased some more lenses, and since then has sold a few as well, leaving me with 2 other lenses at the time, as you can see here. These are also Canon FD mountable lenses. I do feel a bit better, however, at the purchase because the thing has never let me down, even if I don't use it all that much anymore. And the speed booster will knock that F2.8 down to a cool 2.0 and remove that annoying vignetting that was inevitable when using a 35mm lens on a micro 4/3 sensor. So your mileage will vary, but it seems to fix most of it. One issue that I ran into right away is that my camera kept complaining that no lens was attached, but thankfully there is an option in the GH series of cameras that allows you to shoot without a lens. I also struggled to get the lens on the Metabones adapter because there's a tiny little screw, as you see here, that interferes, and that's why it was hard to get on in the first place. According to some forums, the screw is required for some of the older Canon FD cameras, but apparently the Metabones adapter wasn't quite precise enough with that, and there was apparently 2 different revisions as well of the FD camera mount. One is easier to get lenses on and off, and the other isn't. Even with the screw, I can still put it on, but you have to be super precise in your positioning or it won't go on correctly. Thus, I just took the screw off, making it easier on myself. One of the first and last paid productions I did on the lens was actually a promotional video for a trailer park that turned out well. Even so, I realized that this thing is not the most suitable thing for video production, and we struggled to keep the lens stabilized, especially during zooms and pans. I used it sparingly for that purpose, and mostly used it for photography and for getting stock footage after that point. But don't get me wrong, this is a spectacular lens, even if it is a bit hazy in lower light situations. Here is some of the footage I got from the camera just recently, and some other footage from the past as well. I do have to mention that this thing loves light. The more you give it, the better it looks. It doesn't perform too well in low light, but outside in the sun, it rocks. This thing can produce some unique images, especially at f32, as you can see from the footage. The compression on the image is incredible, and it can capture far away objects at hundreds of meters and compress them down to what looks like all in focus, that might be even 50 feet away. It can also produce a fairly shallow depth of field, especially with the Metabones adapter. But if you listen to Unsung Cinematics, the podcast that I co-host, you will know how vocal I am about the Toneh or Bokeh effect of being kind of a distraction, to tell you the truth, and it doesn't really add anything to the composition of the shot, if you ask me. I find myself liking images that are either in the best sharpness range or just slightly out of focus. This Tokina lens, however, is in a crowd of its own when it comes to the smallest aperture. The sharpest sweet point seems to be somewhere in the f4 to f6 range, but I couldn't really pinpoint it. And it doesn't really get any sharper or duller when you go higher than that. It is noticeably less sharp though when you're at f.2. However, it still produces what I think are nice images. Regardless, this is a lens for the ages in all times. I hope I will get a chance to use it more, but in the meantime, it's going to sit protected and tucked away until I need it again. Thank you, Tokina AT-X 80-200 for your years of service. You will be loved. Well, thank you for joining me today. And do like, subscribe, and comment on the video. It does help with the reach of the YouTube algorithm. Take care, everyone, and I hope to see you in the next video.